All right, folks. So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to yet another edition of ASQ's Lean Enterprise Division webinar series. Today we have John Goodman, who's going to be speaking on
Thanks very much. I'm John Goodman, but I am not the actor, although I've gotten bills for him. My wife opened our American Express bill and found a $2,600 charge for the Four Seasons Hotel in New York on a night she wasn't there. It was the other John Goodman. But our claim to fame is that we did research for the White House about 40 years ago that instigated creation of the use of 800 numbers for customer service, and also really the original strategies for collecting customer feedback. I've done, I think, 11 articles for Quality Progress, starting with complaint handling. We've now migrated into delight and use of the voice of the customer process. And the fact that I've suggested that in many cases, Lean Six Sigma is focused way too much on cost cutting as opposed to looking at enhancing the customer experience, and that the revenue implications of better service and quality are 10 to 20 times the cost implications. So if you're selecting your projects based on cost savings, you're probably selecting the wrong projects. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. In terms of, so today we're going to be talking about one particular opportunity. Customers have all kinds of points of pain that do damage and end up costing people money, but employees have an awful lot of points of pain also. And a bunch of those have to do with doing their job and being successful and supporting external customers. A professor from Wharton about a year and a half ago wrote an article, his name was Capelli, in the Wall Street Journal, basically saying get rid of all employee surveys because nobody uses them, they're BS, and they are demoralizing. We did a counter to that said, well, a lot of employee surveys are done the wrong way. They're asking, do you like your supervisor and your benefits, and is the food good in the cafeteria? But when one shifts that and starts saying, what are the barriers to doing a good job in serving whoever your customer is, all of a sudden you get really actionable data. And what we have found is that the points of pain that employees encounter overlap the points of pain that customers encounter by about 30% across most organizations. So if you fix one of those points of pain, you get a twofer in that you have happier customers, you have happier employees, and in many cases, you also have dramatically higher productivity. And I'm going to be showing you the methods for that, also a case study. So we're going to talk about customer behavior, customer experience 3.0, which is our strategy, which is actually being implemented in a number of companies, especially in Japan. It's being adopted by a number of major companies. And then 4 ways of increasing quality's impact and creating a revenue-based experience. Now, first of all, what we have found is that staff really isn't to blame for most bad customer experience. Everyone says, we could just get the staff to do better. In fact, what we find is customers cause a lot more difficulties, and one needs to be proactive, preventive, and engaging. And in fact, one of the best ways of enhancing the customer experience is to fix the customer via customer education and onboarding. And by the way, this is one of the big points of pain that employees have, is that customer expectations have not been properly set up front by the sales and marketing area. Technology is critically important because to be able to respond to customer problems, you have to know everything about the customer, and that comes from technology. And another key point is that the staff has to have the flexibility and the ability to give clear, believable explanations. Ideally, you want to do the job right the first time. And this is where companies get into trouble because they define quality as we delivered the product according to spec. I actually have an article in this July's Quality Progress saying that according to spec is no longer an acceptable outcome for what quality should be trying to achieve. In addition to the objective, The cause, in many cases, of delivering the product and having an unpleasant surprise is the customer, because customers do stupid things, they fail to read, and it's now to the point where Sharp Electronics has a placard in the top of the box that says, when all else fails, try reading the directions. I asked service and quality executives, I had an audience of about 100 recently, and I said, how many of you have read your homeowner's insurance policy cover to cover? One lady put her hand up. I told that lady to get a life, but I said, look, if you don't read the directions in the policies, why would you expect your customers to? So one needs to look at how do you do the job right the first time in a broader context. Secondly, access, most people say, oh, that's answering the phone fast. No, there's a prerequisite, which is getting the customer to complain. And in fact, business to business customers, we find complain very seldom because they figure, well, that's just the way the industry is, or I don't want to get that service tech into trouble because I'm dependent on him. And so we have a very large iceberg of non-complainants. The third piece is the effective service system, and our criticism there is that they spend most of their time responding to individual customers rather than saying, why are we getting all these calls? And an interesting illustration is that Toyota, for every 25 people they have on the phones, they have one full-time person saying, why are we getting all these calls? What has not changed is that, as I said, most people don't complain. In a business-to-business environment, there's this fear of souring the relationship. Also, 60% of employees don't complain. So when you're looking at complaint data or warranty data or any data that signifies problems, take the number that you are aware of, multiply by 3 or possibly as much as 20, and that will tell me how many instances of defective quality you actually have in the marketplace. Now, this doesn't mean that you manufactured it wrong. It means that the customer is unhappy at the end of the day. We find most people assume the employee causes the problem. Customers cause 20 to 30%, and then the company designs unpleasant surprises into the product or service in the other 40 to 60% of cases. And everything now is complicated. It used to be that a faucet was a piece of iron that you turned on and off and it would last for 20 years. You now have faucets you can talk to, wave at, and they have all kinds of electronics. And so now they all of a sudden can fail in many, many additional ways. And we're also finding consumers are no longer expecting it to last 20 years. They are viewing it more as a cell phone. So the basic point is that now that you have complexity in electronics in just about every product, our contention is at least 30% of problems can be prevented by educating the customer more effectively in at least how to avoid the 3 most prevalent problems that they encounter. Quality people would say, well, that's not my job. I would argue that fixing the customer now has to be part of quality's job. Yes, you're going to work with communications or marketing or sales or whomever or customer service, but you have to view proactive customer education as one of the primary methods that you use for enhancing quality. And I think for a lot of those on this audience, that may be a somewhat radical suggestion. The consensus was that 30% of customers don't read their contracts. So they really don't know what they purchased in many cases and what their responsibilities are. Now, this is data borrowed with their permission from Federal Express. I have changed some of the numbers and done some rounding, but basically what we find is that in a B2B environment, of the customers who have problems, you will find that normally no more than 25% will complain, even about serious problems. But if they're satisfied, loyalty is actually higher than if they had had no problem whatsoever, and they're telling people positive things about the company. On the other hand, if they're dissatisfied, loyalty is damaged, telling a lot more people negative things. And the biggest problem are the 75% who have had loyalty damaged and are still spreading negative word of mouth, but you don't even know that that's taking place. What we have also found is that you can delight companies just the same way you can delight consumers. And a good example of this is 800 customers from a SaaS company where the average purchase is about $500,000. Expectations exceeded, you actually have a much higher level of satisfaction and NPS than if they were completely satisfied. For instance, at Hyundai, life will be beautiful. We have a 100,000-mile warranty. But as I pointed out to the CEO in a meeting, I said, but you've got 12 footnotes on that 100,000-mile warranty. And if you really want customer satisfaction, you've got to eliminate the footnotes. And the general counsel started hyperventilating at that point. So basically, the point is, when you design products that are complicated, you are by definition building unpleasant surprises into the product if the customer isn't going to understand how to use the functionality. And in fact, what we have found, we've done recent studies for 2 auto companies in Japan, and the biggest single point of pain is the complexity of the dashboard, because the consumers are having trouble understanding how to use the navigation system and the infotainment system and all the other systems. And as a result, people are frustrated and unhappy. A gentleman who actually wrote the foreword to one of my previous books at Toyota actually went to his engineers and said, no more new features and complexity till you can make it intuitive. And yes, as Rick says, the elegance of design is simplicity. And that's the critical thing here, is that you've got to keep it simple as opposed to adding functionality on top of functionality. I mentioned delight very, very quickly. We've done a huge study on delight. You can get the study from me afterward. But one of the biggest delighters was transparency, where you're talking about, here are 3 things you need to know how to avoid problems with this product. Now, when I mention this to marketing executives, they get really unhappy and nervous. I had the CMO of one of the largest financial service companies laugh nervously and say, it's really not in the DNA of marketing guys to talk about problems. And also, your frontline needs to show interest and connect with people and be enthusiastic. Now, these other things, showing interest and connecting and being enthused, that takes 30 seconds to do, and it can dramatically enhance the customer experience. And the good news is that it's as effective as cutting price and giving people discounts, and it's as effective as cross-selling other products. So the basic point is that quality needs to be cognizant that these behaviors and this customer communication is actually a more cost-effective way of enhancing the customer experience than necessarily improving physical quality. And that's really the point I'm making, is that you need to understand there are other solutions to your problem if the goal is to have a happier customer and a higher value delivery to the customer. Oh, the one other point I would make here is, on the left-hand side, this was a shocker. Digital channels were used to deliver 48% of the delight experiences. This means you can actually delight a customer via an email or a chat, which I never expected. I always thought you needed my tone of voice and ideally my eye contact. And what we basically have found is that an email, well crafted, can create delight. The one point I will make here is that when people say they are delighted versus they've just gotten good service, you find that you have over a 30% increase in the number of people who said they would pay more for the product. Now, what are the causes of frontline employee frustration? It's lack of support and timely information. It's lack of information that I need to take action or answer the question. It's lack of training or flexible authority, and it's lack of recognition and supervisory cover to take risks. So this is one of the major sets of frustrations of the front line. And I'm going to focus on the lack of support and timely information and lack of information. If one is going to create a twofer where we can figure out what are the overlaps between employee frustrations and customer frustrations, the first thing you need to do, go to a bunch of your frontline people, start with a dozen of them in 2 focus groups, and say, what are your frustrations in trying to give good service? And which of those frustrations then actually impact an external customer? I can't find the status of the shipment, or was told the shipment was going to go at this time, and then they changed the shipment date and nobody told me, and the customer called up to say, where the heck is my shipment? Those are the types of frustrations. How often does each frustration occur, and how much time is wasted each time chasing down the information? Also, this gets to the issue that 2/3 of companies don't have what I call the golden rule of communication, which is that if I send you an email or leave you a voice message, you actually should return my call. And 2/3 of companies don't really formally tell employees that's part of the responsibility. You then have to present a list of problems to at least 200 customers. We recommend, if you have this many customers, go to 1,000. At FedEx, we went to 3,000 customers. We got 1,000 responses back. And that's the level of specificity we would suggest. But you provide them with a list of problems and areas where they need assistance. And then you basically say, did you what problems did you have? Did you complain? And how well did we handle it? So you ask the customers about granular problems, whether they contacted the company, the outcome of their request for assistance, and then what was the resulting loyalty and word of mouth behavior. And then what you do is you compare 1 to 2. You compare what the employees have said are the problems to the problems that the customers have said. And then you identify 2 or 3 of those that are prevalent in both, and those are your synergistic twofers. The poor internal communication and service is the failure of support departments to respond to inquiries by phone. And again, we recommend that one has a 2-hour time frame, or the failure to respond ever, the fact that I don't have the right kind of training, I don't have the empowerment, or there are surprise changes in production schedules. Also, the other thing that we find is a big issue is knowledge management systems that have out-of-date sales and inventory data. One of the big things you're going to see in a minute is minimum order quantities and pricing. No information on new policies and marketing offers. Lack of product information and lack of where is the product in the production process. Assuming you are tracking this stuff internally, make it available to the customer. Customers have now been trained by FedEx and Amazon that when I order something, I can then track where it is in the process. This is Quicken Loans, and if you click on one of these center boxes, you can literally see whose desk your mortgage application is sitting on. Now, the big pushback from companies is, wow, we don't want to open this process up to our customers because they're going to see how messed up we are. Well, it's a good way of creating discipline if you have your customer looking over your shoulder. This is an example of the employee frustration survey. And again, what you say to the frontline employees is, look at the list of frustrations below and identify those that do the most damage in terms of wasted time as well as your and customer frustration. You see in the first column, calls not returned in a timely manner, calls not returned at all. And again, we're being very specific and granular. Rather than having, I get poor service from this department, we are trying to get as specific as possible, because if you're going to have an improvement process, you're going to want to be able to measure process metrics as to how often are calls not being returned. What is the response time for email inquiries? So again, granularity is critically important when you're doing the employee frustration survey. And this is actual data, again, rounded just for presentation purposes, from an actual global electronics company. And what we basically found here was that the slow and no email response, 30% of the employees said that happened a lot. And of those employees, 20% said, this is not a good company to work at. I would not recommend it. So you could literally take a look and see that you had a significant number. You had 30% of employees were at risk due to different issues. And one interesting one here is getting quotes and pricing approval. This did 60% damage because the employees were frustrated, because what we found was that if a potential customer calls up and says, I need a quote for this, or I want to get this minimum order quantity, is that okay? The employee would then have to turn around and call product management to get the price or to get permission for the minimum order quantity. What we found was that if that response from product management took more than 2 days, the customer had moved on. They'd gone to a different vendor and you lost the sale, which was very frustrating for the frontline employee. So what we found was that you had to have a internal service level agreement that if we need a price quote, you got to give it to us within 8 business hours or we're probably going to lose the sale. And that got a number of senior executives' attention.
A little bit. Somebody suggested that AI probably plays very well with keeping price and inventory data current. So makes it easier to be up to date, I suppose.
Actually, you're assuming that it has access to valid data. You're absolutely correct. Agree that AI, theoretically, if it's properly used internally, would absolutely potentially help in that area. Inadequate training on tough issues, again, would never be viewed as a quality kind of an issue, but in fact, it's critically important to assure that employees have the ability to take risks and color outside the lines. One of the biggest problems is supervisors are afraid to let employees color outside the lines, but that's where you can get problems fixed very quickly. Also, customer misled on delivery. That's where the salesman made promises that were not possibly going to be kept. The other benefit that you get is that we ask employees, okay, this happened 15 times this month. How much time did you waste each time it occurred? And for the accurate data, it was 10 minutes. For no response, having to chase you down and get your answer took 30 minutes. So in fact, we were able to point out that we were wasting 1,400 hours of rather expensive people, in addition to the employee frustration and the customer frustration. So again, we're showing tangible out-of-pocket waste in addition to the revenue impact. And this is actually from the global electronics company. We started off with one of their divisions and then ultimately went to the whole $16 billion company. And again, you had 18% of employees were at risk in this particular case. And what happens here is for each problem, we then say, okay, how many had this as the most serious problem and how many of those would not recommend the company as a good place to work? And what's interesting here is if you look at the 5th issue, difficulty escalating on behalf of the customer, 100% of those employees were so frustrated that they had to go up the line to get assistance to help this customer, that 100% of them said, this is not a good place to work, and they were demoralized. So again, this argues for the empowerment of the front line. Now, in terms of identifying the customer points of pain, this again is courtesy of FedEx, and some of the FedEx executives really hated this survey because it said, well, it implies customers have problems. In a big B2B environment, customers always have problems. That's no huge surprise. And in fact, what this allowed us to do was, in a granular way, identify exactly what the points of pain were that customers had. And this type of a survey will turn up things that executive visits will not turn up. For instance, number 6, the salesperson not available, or number 5, the salesperson didn't fully explain FedEx. A lot of people don't want to throw their sales rep under the bus because they are dependent on them. And as one person said, well, I don't want to complain about my agent because I go to church with him. But now that you have it on the list, yeah, that is a problem. So we find that by putting things on the list, you give the customer permission to tell you that, yes, it's a problem. And when you aid people with a list like this, you turn up 3 times as many problems. And you also get a much better feel for, among those problems, which are the ones that are really doing the most damage. In a survey of 2,000 customers in this global electronics company, what we found was that not able to find products on the website, the stale website data, that was costing us about $10.5 million annually just in this one small division. And the order delayed without notice, customer care not responsive, and delayed quotes and MOQs, which basically was all that service couldn't get good service from other parts of the organization. That was costing another $15 million. So we were able to basically say that this poor internal service was just in this one small division was costing $2 million a month. That was enough to start getting management's attention. So management then created a task force to update the stale data. They created a company-wide communication standard where internal requests supporting external customers got priority. You will respond. And they created a golden rule for all internal communications. And they created internal service agreements to ensure that product management and operations responded so that we didn't lose those sales because we weren't rapidly providing quotes. The impact was the net promoter score was up double digits, and we can digress at a later time and talk about, I'm no fan of net promoter. I actually have an article entitled Net Promoter is Like Global Warming, lots of hand wringing, but no action. But in this division, revenue went up $40 million, much of it associated with eliminating those points of pain. The sales loss due to late quotes almost disappeared, and employee satisfaction was up dramatically. There are 5 overall metrics that you should be looking at for customer experience. The first is easy to do business with, and it's basically how easy is it to get information and get stuff done. And we find a very, very high correlation with Net Promoter and willingness to recommend, and actually have tied it back to long-term sales and see that those people that give high ratings on easy to do business with, in fact, are increasing sales from the organization and are much less price sensitive. The next is, what is your customer problem list? Using an aided list like the FedEx survey. What are your employee points of pain? And especially, what is the overlap? Everyone is now using customer effort, and in many cases, we see it being misused. The question is basically asking the customer, how much effort did you have to expend to get this problem fixed? The problem with a single customer effort score is that 90% of customers, even B2B, first go to the website. They are frustrated by the website. They can't find what they need. Then they go to the 800 number or the chat and deal with the contact center. Most of their frustration is due to not finding stuff on the website, but we're finding that the service center is being tarred with the website brush. So one needs to have a separate customer effort score for the website versus the contact center. This is a metric that almost no one is using, but I would argue that quality is the one who should be really focusing on it, is what percent of the major issues raised by the voice of the customer actually get fixed. And this is something that's discussed in detail in the Amazon Way, which talks about the fact that when customers raise an issue, almost all of them are cross-functional. And what Bezos would do would be to assign it to one particular function, saying, well, yeah, I know that there are other people involved. It's up to you to get them all aligned so that the issue gets fixed. So he assigned accountability for issues, even when they were cross-functional. And that was one of the live or die metrics was, did the issue actually get fixed in a timely manner? And we find very few companies ever evaluate their voice of the customer process by seeing how much impact does it really have. Sort of a field expedient approach I take is I go to product managers. I did this at Colgate-Palmolive not too long ago, where I went to the product manager, said, here's the voice of the customer report from last week, or last month rather. Did you read it? What action did you take? At first it was, do you remember getting it? And only half of them remembered getting it. Then, did you read it and what action? And if you took no action, it's not having any impact. So to build a revenue business case, what we find is in all of your businesses, and we've worked in 1,000 companies in 45 of the Fortune 100, half of customer attrition is due to customers having problems. The other half is grass is greener, product attributes, personal relationships, whatever. So half of customer attrition, which in the average company is about 6 to 8% per year, is due to problems. You have to get buy-in from the CFO and the CMO that revenue is important. And what we have found is that where the CFO understands and buys into the fact that problems beget attrition and lost revenue, you have twice the impact on satisfaction of quality and voice of the customer processes. Now, quick example of how one builds the economic model. This is from consumer packaged goods, but let's say we had 200,000 customers with problems, 90% don't complain, and of those 80% don't repurchase. We've got about 150,000 customers who are at risk. Customer support or consumer affairs area is really only dealing with about 11,000 of those customers, but they are rescuing about $2.3 million in revenue, which is good. You have 144,000 customers who are silently unhappy, and you are losing $43 million that you're leaving on the table. So the point I'm making here is the whole customer service process, dealing with those 11,000 customers, is rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic compared to the $43 million that you're not even hearing about from the customers who don't complain. What if you prevented 25% of those problems? And again, that's the role of quality, I think, is to prevent problems from taking place. If we went from 200,000 customers to 150,000, customer service is now saving a few more customers. If we spend $500,000 on customer education or other things to reduce the problems, the silent loss customers goes down to 108,000, have now added $10 million in revenue, 10.8, $11 million to revenue. And if we spent $500,000 on a quality improvement or customer education program, we're getting an ROI of 650%. So the basic point I'm making is that you guys are the champions of problem prevention. You need to think more broadly about how problems can be prevented, including fixing the customer, but the revenue implications of fixing problems and preventing them is huge. And so the ROI can be an order of magnitude larger than your mundane Lean Six Sigma activity in a plant. A bit radical and potentially disrespectful, I apologize. Does this make sense to people? if you go after the silent customers and prevent their problems. Done just tons of research in CPG, but this data is courtesy of Motorola Commercial Communications. It's actually in my book. That's because this data is very old, and so they felt comfortable letting me use it. But this, again, was from their commercial communications customers, a census of them, so thousands of them. And at the time, this again is more than a decade ago, the big problems were meeting promised delivery date, and that put 1.3% of customers at risk, meeting commitments and follow through on repair and delivery, 2.8%, and then the really mundane issue of returning phone calls. That actually, when one looks at the damage, the 33.3% of people said, I wouldn't recommend you based on that. So literally the unreturned phone calls did more damage than lying about the delivery date. On the other hand, product availability within desired time frame using Pareto, that would be the second most prevalent problem. And what we found was it did no damage. It was a squeaky wheel that didn't deserve grease, because the customer said, okay, I'd really like to get this product in 2 weeks, but if I have to wait 4 weeks or 6 weeks, I can live with that as long as you then meet your commitment and deliver on time. I know that I just have to extend my ordering time horizon. And so what we found was that the problems that appear to be prevalent, and in this case, they were about to spend millions of dollars raising inventory so they could deliver faster. And what it basically said was, you don't need to do that. Just have a longer time horizon, but then meet your commitments. So this allowed you to pick your battles and identify which squeaky wheels didn't deserve grease versus which did. In summary, customer and employee points of pain overlap by 30%. There are 4 actions. You should prevent problems via careful sales and marketing effectiveness. Onboard customers, make somebody accountable. In half of companies, no one is accountable for customer onboarding and how effective it is. And actually, let me stop there. One good example at Ryder Trucks, they have sales reps who will say, lease 100 of our trucks and your uptime will be fantastic. To his credit, the group VP of marketing says, but let's talk about when one of those trucks breaks down, we're going to take 2 hours to try and repair it before we give you a new refrigerator truck because they're $200,000 a copy. So talking about the potential problems creates trust and transparency and eliminates that you guys slid this by me. Coordinate the voice of the customer and voice of the employee to identify the overlaps with the greatest leverage. Assure communication and internal support to all internal service providers with the communications golden rule. And then, because again, the revenue-based business case is 10 to 20 times the cost implications. I'll open it up to discussion. If you are interested in a copy of my latest book, Strategic Customer Service, just send me an email and we'd be happy to do a briefing like this for any of your teams.
So a couple of people mentioned some things. There were some questions about NPS or Net Promoter Scores.
And our NPS, I guess it's 3.0, or it really doesn't solve the problems. It's still not very actionable. You can't translate it into revenue implications. So, okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
That sounds like another topic for another webinar. So just lots and lots of things that I liked. I think if I had to boil down all my notes, I think it's really create trust and think about customers instead of yourself. It's like putting customers ahead.
I'm thinking of the CFO of a major Japanese electronics company where he basically wasn't getting it. And then I asked him about his car dealer, and he got this really black look on his face and said, my BMW dealer, I hate him. And I said, guess what? There are XYZ customers who feel the same way about your company. Oh, that's pretty bad. And so by taking it to his personal experience, all of a sudden he saw the parallels with how his customers might behave.
Sure. I thought it was interesting too. Just some things like you were talking about frequently asked questions, and when they focus on the company and sort of like here's all our weasel words and how we're not gonna like meet our commitment, versus what you were talking about, keep it simple, keep it focused on the customer. I think that is valuable, and I think that's what some of these leaders like Apple or some of these other brand lifestyle kind of things impact. Right? It's easy. That's why I like my iPhone.
Well, and in fact, one of the other challenges is you do need to. I talked about customer education as being sort of a panacea. One needs to tailor the education to the customer. We actually did some of the early support strategy at Apple, and one of the things we would do if you called up with an issue, we would basically say, "Are you a techno geek? Do you know enough to be dangerous, or are you a music major?" And we would have three completely different ways of explaining the same issue to you, depending on how sophisticated you were in the area. And that's one of the big problems that companies make, or the mistakes they make when they're onboarding customers, is they don't first assess how smart is this customer in this product area. As somebody said earlier, we have to decide, are we the first time you've ever used this kind of a product, or are you a veteran of this?
One of them that I thought was very interesting, and I know it's true from my personal experience. You basically said you tell three times as many people when you're unhappy as when you're happy, and it might even be more than that. I don't know, but that's a huge
That's
number.
the median that we find. It varies on both sides. And now we just did and this is available also to anybody who wants it. We just completed the 2023 National Rage Study, which is what makes people so angry they start swearing at a company. And several disturbing facts came out of that. One is about 30% of people who are unhappy now post on social media, but a lot of them don't even reach out to the company. They're just posting directly to social media. 6% go to a lawyer or a regulator right away. And also 43% of people have admitted that they have yelled at a customer service rep. And 36% of people think it is socially okay to be rude and obnoxious to service people. 21% feel that it's okay to make physical threats. So civility has declined rather dramatically. There's a Wharton professor who says that once it gets to 25%, then society really starts going downhill. And the rudeness is now we're at 36%, so we've passed the tipping point. But the physical threats is now up to 21%, which is scary. And we actually have this data by industry if people are interested. And again, we've got and it even made the CBS Evening News. So that's available to anybody who wants it.
One thing that struck me too, John, was the idea that a lot of these customer service reps, the front line, the interface with the company, they sound like they're working around the company rules and all that. It's just funny. That's just amazing.
Yeah, well, and surprisingly, American companies are more permissive. They're still way too tight, but they're more permissive than, for instance, Japanese companies. We brought 4 gaggles of Japanese over the past few years to the United States because they perceive we give better service. And one of the key reasons is that we empower our frontline more than the Japanese, which tend to still have very much of a hierarchical, paternalistic kind of an environment where there is only one way and one answer, etc. So it's the empowerment, and this again goes back to Paul Zach's research at Claremont College, that if I give you flexibility and I give you recognition, the oxytocin's higher in your brain, and you're going to love to come to work, and your staff is much more stable. Recognition, the oxytocin's higher in your brain, and you're going to love to come to work, and your staff is much more stable. Zach has an article in the Harvard Business Review. It's called The Neuroscience of Trust. And Zach is, if you can wrap your head around this, a neuroeconomist. Very interesting title, but in any case, just very compelling data.
Well, speaking of data, I love your emphasis on data to really be able to make definitive statements. Measuring points of pain, I really like that, as well as just using data for clarity so that we're not talking about what might be or used to be. We're talking about what is. I like that.
Yeah, and for onboarding, I just got off of a briefing with another client that they're doing all kinds of customer education and onboarding, but they're not doing any measurement. And I said, look, Amazon does 10,000 A/B experiments a year. That's how they fine tune their operation. And quality people are the masters of doing experiments and A/B tests. So I would try 4 different approaches to educating customers and see which ones give you the biggest lift. So you can then demonstrate to management that this investment in proactive education and fixing the customer really is worth its time.
So before we wrap up, we've got a couple of minutes left. I do want to tell folks, I've been dumping links into the chat now for a while. So if you haven't taken a look at that, I've got links for just about everything we've talked about in terms of YouTube, LinkedIn, connecting with John on LinkedIn, those things, including the ability to download the presentation from Google Drive. So if for some reason you can't access Google Drive, let me know, and we'll turn it back to John.
I would commend to you my article in the July Quality Progress and also on where my article on the overlap, the points of pain, it's on customerthink.com. That's where the original article is. And there's a lot of very interesting, progressive, challenging articles on that website. It's customerthink.com. And I've got probably 15 articles on there. And on the Net Promoter would love to talk to people about Net Promoter, because I think it's expended a huge amount of resources, a lot of which are being wasted in the wrong area.
Folks, it's been another presentation of ASQ's Lean Enterprise Division webinar series with John Goodman. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, morning, or evening, wherever you are. Bye now.
Great. Thank you.